3 years ago, when we ranked every Bleach arc from worst to best, I deliberately left one arc out. An arc so controversial, so divisive, that even mentioning it can split a Bleach fan group chat in half. And no, I'm not talking about Camp Fury World or the Fullbring arc, the only arc to ever be used in an official court trial, the Bount Arc.
This reminds me of this anime named Bleach, where it's 16 seasons, every episode is about 20 episodes, and they have season 4 and 5, they have these bounts, they're the villains of the whole thing, in season 4 and season 5. You go to season 6, you don't hear about the bounts. You go to season 7, you don't hear about the bounts. Why don't you hear about these important characters? Because they're filler characters.
Before we get into today's video, make sure to check out Drew at What If Universe for editing today's video. Today we are starting a brand new series where we are ranking every single filler arc to exist, diving headfirst into the one arc that even Studio Period didn't know what to do with. That's right, we're finally talking about that arc. The one with vampires, cursed dolls, and one of the strangest release schedules in shonen history. Is it as bad as everyone says, or is it secretly a misunderstood gem with some surprisingly cool moments? Before we break it down, let's get a few things straight. First, this is anime-only filler, so if you're a manga purist, don't worry, I've got you covered, I'll be summarizing the story. But if you have watched Bleach and you didn't skip episodes 64 through 109, then you already know just how weird things get when Soul Society goes off script. Now, as always, we're gonna judge this arc fairly. I'm not just here to dunk on it because the internet told me to and the internet hates it. We're going to look at the characters, the story, the fights, and the themes, and also the pacing, just like every other arc. However, if I do praise it, my career is over. Have you seen what the internet thinks about this arc? Anyway, dust off your forgotten filler memories, and let's explore the strange, occasionally stylish, definitely controversial Bount Arc. Is it filler trash, or does it actually deserve a seat at the Bleach table, even if it's just that wobbly one in the corner? Spoiler alert, the Bount Arc is not actually that bad. The Bount Arc begins with a notable return to the tone and structure of early Bleach, particularly reminiscent of the Substitute Shinigami arc. There's a lighter character-driven energy here with comedic elements and interpersonal dynamics taking the spotlight. This tonal callback is significant. Bleach had, by at this point in the manga, become increasingly focused on a large-scale conflict and high-stakes combat. The anime-exclusive filler chooses to revisit a more grounded atmosphere, which, while brief, is genuinely refreshing. The arc opens up with Ichigo having returned to the world of the living after the whole Eyes and Soul Society fiasco. Life seems to be returning to normal until Renji abruptly arrives, sent by the Soul Society to assist Ichigo in managing the growing number of hollows that are attracted to his uncontrollable spiritual pressure. Shortly after this, the arc introduces its central mystery. Ohime encounters her deceased brother Sora, alive, and he speaks to her as if nothing ever happened. It's an emotionally charged scene leveraging an early unresolved trauma in Ohime's character arc. However, this moment of reunion quickly transforms into a threat as it is revealed that the figure before her is an imposter. A shapeshifter who abducts her and vanishes through a portal that appears to be connected to Hell. As an opening episode, it's remarkably effective. It reestablishes emotional stakes, introduces a clear narrative problem, Ichigo's spiritual pressure leakage, and sets the arc into motion with urgency and intrigue. Unfortunately, this strong foundation quickly begins to erode. What should have served as a concise 2-episode narrative hook is stretched into 5 episodes of largely redundant trials and tests. The pacing slows to a crawl, with Ichigo forced to complete a series of artificially constructed challenges orchestrated by Ohime's captors. Conceptually, some of these trials offer interesting ideas, particularly in how they require strategy and cooperation between Ichigo and Ryu, but their execution is padded, and the dramatic tension they create is rarely sustained. One of the more compelling developments in this segment is Ichigo's temporary loss of his Bankai. This introduces a genuine sense of vulnerability and raises the stakes significantly. However, even this is undercut by the reveal that this entire ordeal was a manufactured test by Kisuke Urahara. While the idea of Kisuke observing and evaluating Ichigo is consistent with his character, the resolution feels anticlimactic. matter. It really reduces what could have been a pivotal moment into a mere plot device. It is at this point that the arc reveals the true identities of Ohime's abductors. 3 artificial souls developed by Kisuke: Ririn, Kuroda, and Noba. Each of them possesses a distinct ability and personality, designed to test and support Ichigo in different ways. Ririn's sharp tongue and assertiveness manipulates illusions to disorient her opponents. Kuroda is eccentric and unpredictable, with a body that can stretch and shift at will. Noba, the most reserved of the trio, can control space and barriers. All 3 are interesting characters and introduced to be quite strong. They have the ability to sense balance, which is what makes them integral for the remainder of the story. I remember finding the next episode to be so cool as a kid. It's the introduction of dolls and Bounts alike. Yoshino, a female Bount, is caught running from something when Ichigo stops her. She doesn't want to fight him, and summons her doll, Goth, which is basically a fire elemental monster. As Goth is about to kill Ichigo and Rukia, another Bount appears, Ryo Utagawa, and he stops her with snakes. And this moment introduces an inner Bount conflict that maybe not all Bounts are the same. I may or may not be skipping a few things, like what exactly a Bount and doll is. Bounts are a rare and unnatural offshoot of humanity, spiritually aware individuals who were accidentally created as a byproduct of early Soul Society experiments in artificial soul engineering. Unlike Shinigami or Quincy, Bounts are essentially immortal, sustaining themselves by sucking humans off. Slurping human souls, which in turn fuels their power and halts their aging. Their most defining trait, however, is the use of dolls, sentient beings formed from the Bount's own spiritual energy. Each doll is unique both in form and ability, and operates independently with its own thoughts and personality. In essence, a doll functions as a living weapon, most similarly to JoJo's Bizarre Adventure's stance. However, this bond between Bounts and dolls is deeply intertwined. If one falls, the other follows. If a Bount gets so weak that the doll thinks it can take over and kill its master, it will. This symbiotic relationship is central to the Bount's identity and plays a key role in how their power dynamics and character conflicts unfold throughout the arc. It also sets them apart thematically, exploring ideas of control, dependency, and the cost of powers in ways that feel distinct from the series' main factions. After this, we are introduced to Ho and Ban, 2 lesser Bounts who confront the main cast. During this time, the main cast is visiting Uryu in the hospital, when all of a sudden, the water begins to drip from the faucet uncontrollably. At a glance, these 2 Bounts offer something new. Their dolls have unusual designs and abilities that hint at a more inventive fight choreography, but the execution is underwhelming. The battle lacks intensity, the direction feels flat, and the stakes are never convincingly established. Both of their Bounts control water. Now, the one genuinely worthwhile moment comes at the end, when both Bounts are killed by their own doll. After becoming too weak to control them, the Bounts drain the very water in the Bounts' bodies. This scene is vital, not only because it's a rare moment of narrative consequence, but it illustrates a key rule of the Bount system. The bond between master and doll is not only powerful, but fragile. That visual demonstration of imbalance foreshadows the deeper conflicts to come, is one of the few moments in the stretch of story that meaningfully advances the plot. During the conflict with Ho and Ban, we get some interesting lore revealed about a move that Master Kaya Jin is going to make, and how one particular does not care. That being Yoshino, the one who controlled the fire elemental. She believes that Bounts are inherently selfish and it doesn't matter. She hates the Bounts. We also get introduced to a Soul Reaper working for the Bounts, and a few other Bounts here and there like this old guy. And we also hear about Jin Kariya, the leader of the Bounts. While most of the Bounts are lame, looking at you glasses, Jin genuinely has a terrifying Bount, and this creates one of the few good cliffhangers inside of the entirety of the Bount arc. The next episode begins with Uryu walking while the cast desperately tries to find him, and there is something about this moment that hits hard. It might just be the Bleach OST, but watching him fall to the ground unable to walk hits, man. And then for the person to help him be someone we once thought of as an enemy is crazy. Yoshino, the girl with the fire elemental doll, saves Uryu and takes him back to her apartment. Honestly, this moment is one of the few emotionally compelling scenes in the arc. It's an awkwardly tender love story surrounding Uryu Ishida and a new Bount affiliated character, Yoshino Soma. Through understanding each other and ultimately through their tragedy, their connection stands out as one of the arc's more humanizing elements. Uryu is still grappling with the aftermath of the Soul Society arc and the loss of his his Quincy powers, finds in Yoshino a reflection of his own identity crisis. She too is caught between worlds, technically human, yet irrevocably altered, persecuted by Soul Society, and distrusted by her own people. What makes their bond intriguing is its quiet subtlety. There's no dramatic confession or sweeping gesture, only small moments of shared vulnerability, mirrored loneliness, and moral ambiguity. Uryu's compassion towards Yoshino doesn't stem from being naive or romantic idealism, but from empathy. He recognizes her pain, not as a rival or threat, but as someone who, like him, has been used and discarded by the systems beyond their control. Their conversations are thoughtful, restrained, and often framed by the question of autonomy. Can a person change their fate, or are they bound to the legacy imposed on them by others? Yoshino, more than any other Bount, resists the cruelty of her kind, and her growing connection with Uryu slowly brings out his protective instincts and his capacity for trust after betrayal. During their conversations, we learn about how Yoshino used to be in love with Jin, Kariya, and believed he was eternally in love with her. However, she realized that he was tricking her the entire time. Jin wished to use Yoshino, so he said whatever would make her controllable. She has come to the realization that Jin has united the Bounts to leave the world of the living and make himself a god. After their conversation, they are attacked by Koga, another Bount that I guess the best example would be like an iron elemental doll thing. Anyway, Koga manages to capture them and Jin finally meets Ishida. Jin tries to convince Uryu to join him, however Uryu rejects the very concept. After putting him in his prison, Ichigo confronts Jin inside of his mansion with Rukia and the 3 mod souls. And I'll say this, Jin lines are so cold in response to Ichigo. They genuinely create like a shiver down your back while you're watching this tense scene. Ichigo does end up fighting the snake guy, which is eh. The ability he has is pretty cool, don't get me wrong, but I don't care enough to learn his name. By the way, his name is Utagawa. Utagawa does use Ichigo's arrival as a distraction though to try to kill Jin, but he fails and dies in his betrayal. This really does showcase that this group of Bounts is hanging together by a single thread. After Jin's Soul Reaper pet kills Utagawa, he moves on to fighting Ichigo. However, quickly Jin Kariya takes over the fight and curb stomps Ichigo. It's here we learn about his pet's backstory. His pet is named Maki Ichinose. Basically, he hates the Soul Society because of the rules of the Kenpachi, and wishes to kill the current reigning Kenpachi because Kenny killed his captain. It's actually a pretty interesting backstory, and when it comes to the arc, he is actually one of the highlights. After running away from the Soul Society, he tried to save a kid from a hollow. However, he was going to die, and this is when Jin saves his life and allows him to finish the battle himself. He then invites him to join their ranks, and Maki Ichinose says yes. Anyway, as Ichigo is getting curb stomped and nearly killed by Jin Kariya, Yoruichi comes in and saves Ichigo from him once again. The following moments of this arc are so bad I won't even be recapping it. Despite these scattered moments of intrigue, the arc continues to struggle under the weight of its own narrative indecision. Instead of tightening its focus or escalating the threat of Jin, it meanders, reintroducing the mod souls for comedic relief, repeating exposition we've already received, and leaning heavily on episodic encounters that do little to move the plot forward. It's during this stretch that the Bounts themselves begin to feel less like a coherent faction and more like a loosely connected set of power demonstrations. Each new member is introduced with a flashy entrance and a signature ability, but rarely with any meaningful motivation or internal logic. The audience is expected to invest in them simply because they are new, not because they are compelling. This largely fails to capitalize on that setup. For an arc built around a dangerous soul-consuming enemy and an unstable protagonist, the urgency feels conspicuously absent, especially with random episodes like episode 80 just thrown in there. It ruins the pacing. This is of course besides a single moment in episode 79 which really drives home some emotional stakes. This is when Yoshino finally confronts Jin one last time. She fuses with her doll, sacrificing her life as she chooses to try to kill Jin one last time. She dies. He kills her. This showcases Uryu's sadness as he was finally able to connect with someone who immediately passed away. Yoshino's character is one of the few highlights in the first half of the arc. Her journey of realization of Jin's corruptness was very beautifully done. Her death was very crucial to completing her character arc though. A long time ago, she tried to commit suicide prior to meeting Jin. In fact, it was Jin recruiting her that caused her to not go through with it. But this was not suicide. It was a death on her own term. Unfortunately, her death was part of Jin's plan to invade the Soul Society. You see, he needed two things: her power to begin the ritual, and Uryu's Quincy powers to finish said ritual. While Ichigo is trying to find the new Bount hideout, he does fight Koga, in which we do get an additional backstory from Koga. Basically, Koga was training a new Bount, however the kid went behind his back and tried to do the ritual to receive a doll early, this killing him. Koga blames himself for the kid's death. And while that backstory is cool as it showcases Bount culture, it's also an entire episode for what should have been 3 to 5 minutes of content. And I think that really is the nail in the coffin. Everything in this first half is stretched out to fill as many episodes as possible, which is what makes it so boring. There are cool scenes scattered around, but they're between like a giant filling. It's like having a burger that's filled with mushrooms as a filler. Like you're not eating meat, you're eating mushrooms. There are some cool scenes after this where our Bount controls Rukia and Ohime fights Rukia in a 1v1, and a few other fights here and there, but most of the fights are boring and not worth watching or recapping. More Soul Reapers come into the world of the living, and they help fight the Bounts, but it's just really drawn out boring fights. Finally, after 26 episodes, the Bount escaped to the Soul Society thanks to Uryu knowingly stabilizing their portal. We do get a small exposition moment from Jin, talking about how Bounts are ostracized from society despite being human, which makes sense. I mean, your species sucks off humans. Pause. It would bring up an interesting dilemma if these Bounts were anything like the ghouls in Tokyo Ghoul. The ghouls can only consume humans. A Bount could live a normal life. Consuming human souls only extends their lives past normal years, but they can live a life that's normal. The only important thing I really skipped over is the part where it shows that Jin carelessly discards Bounts as soon as they stop being useful to him. We also skipped over some really lame fights between Bounts and our Soul Reaper friends, but this is fair. Creating character progression is really hard to do well in filler, because the characters have to be the same by the end of the story. So the best way to go about it is by creating interesting characters that are filler only, or expanding a side character with the author's permission. The Bount arc at this point of the story fails to do both outside of Jin and Yoshino. However, this does change in part 2, where some of the other Bounts do become interesting. Jin might claim he is getting revenge against the Soul Society, but in reality he is bringing about the extinction of his people. However, that is something we dive more into in the second half of the Bount arc. The first half of the Bount arc is unfortunately difficult to defend. The pacing becomes glacial, and while there are occasional flashes of creativity or character insight, the overall structure lacks momentum. Plot progression stalls, and much of the runtime feels like filler within filler scenes that exist more so to stretch the arc's length than to develop its themes or characters. While I enjoyed the relationship of Yoshino and Uryu, Jin's presence, Maki Ichinose's backstory, there were a lot of slow pacing moments and sloppy decisions made. One of the most balling decisions involves Uryu, who despite having lost his Quincy powers in the manga, is given a temporary spiritual tool courtesy of Mayuri Kurasuchi. Of all people, the narrative justification is thin at best. Mayuri is the last person Uryu would willingly accept help from, especially after their traumatic encounter in the Soul Society arc. But the anime writers were boxed in. If they excluded Uryu entirely, it would feel like a glaring omission. Yet restoring his powers permanently would interfere with the continuity of the Arrancar arc. The result is a clumsy compromise that neither satisfies narratively nor respects the character's arc. In addition, Uryu is not doing his due diligence before consciously shooting the portal. This makes no sense. He even is aware of the consequences of the Bounts gained to the Soul Society. Uryu is usually a careful character that, besides one instance, does not make hasty decisions. Do not get me wrong, I do not think that this 26 episodes are complete garbage. There are some creative highlights mixed in. However, overall, for the first half of the Bount arc, it's a 3.5 out of 10. However, the second half changes everything, and perhaps makes this first half worth the boredom.
Want some coffee?
What the hell? Dude, that's disgusting.
I told you before, it's coffee.
The second half of the Bount Arc is an emotional roller coaster, to put it lightly. After the climax of the first half, the pace picks up immediately, with relentless high-stakes combat. The Bounts invade the Soul Society with overwhelming fury, easily tearing through 2 lieutenants and wiping out squads of Soul Reapers. Their power is drastically amplified within the Soul Society, making them far more dangerous than before. Ichigo and his crew leave the world of the living in search of Rantau, the creator of the Bounts, hoping she holds the key to stopping them once and for all. Meanwhile, Rukia finds herself in a tense game of cat and mouse with one of the Bounts, a sequence that stretches out for nearly 20 minutes. And just before the audience falls asleep, as her luck runs out, the GOAT himself makes an entrance. Byakuya. Even if you're not a fan of filler arcs, every Byakuya fight is worth watching, and this entrance is iconic. I mean, he just absolutely destroys her. From here though, the arc decides to sharpen its focus. Jin Kariya begins rallying factions from the Rukongai, slowly amassing an army and formally declaring war on the Gotai 13. This truly sets the stage for one of the best fights in the arc. Byakuya, sensing Jin's presence, leaves his quarters and enters a quiet forest. Rukia is still wounded from her previous fight, and she lies nearby as Byakuya confronts Kariya directly. What follows is a quiet, tense moment. 2 powerful forces standing alone in the woods. Byakuya, cold and resolute, declares his intention to kill Kariya for threatening the safety of the Soul Society. It's a symbolic show between the main villain, quote-unquote, of the Soul Society arc and the central villain of the Bount arc. Just as the battle begins to escalate, Ichigo arrives and attempts to intervene, but Byakuya warns him plainly, stay out of it or be treated as an enemy. He then activates Bankai and nearly overwhelms Jin in an incredible clash. This is until Rantau appears and reveals herself. This distraction allows the other Bounts to step in and rescue Jin, pulling him back from the brink of defeat. The arc then pivots into a series of scattered but emotionally weighted confrontations between captains and Bounts. Mayuri Kurosuchi battles and eliminates the Elder Bount. Soifun fights and defeats Mabashi. Uryu faces off against Yoshi in a match that, while not groundbreaking, ties in meaningfully to his earlier arc. Among these, there is one other fight that stands out. It is undoubtedly Maki Ichinose versus Kenpachi Zaraki. The fight is brutal. It's one-sided and it's everything you expect from Kenpachi, while Maki is utterly outclassed. The emotional weight behind his motivations and fall from grace gives this battle a level of depth that the others just simply lack. The fight between Maki Ichinose and Kenpachi Zaraki is a brutal, tragic spectacle that stands out as the emotional centerpiece of the later Bount arc. Maki, once a noble Soul Reaper, fights not just to defeat Kenpachi, but to validate his own misguided ideals and prove the worth of the strength he's gained under Jin Kariya's banner. But against the overwhelming force of Kenpachi, who relishes battle for battle's sake, Maki is hopelessly outmatched. The clash is fast, violent, and personal, with Kenpachi's raw power cutting through Maki's desperation like his blade through steel. What makes the fight compelling isn't just the carnage, it's the pathos. Maki's rage, his need for purpose, and his futile rebellion all unravel in the face of a warrior who fights with no need for justification. In the end, Kenpachi doesn't just defeat Maki, he exposes the emptiness behind his cause. Following this turning point, Jin Kariya ascends to terrifying new heights by absorbing the power of the Jokaisho, an act that marks one of the more creative and thematically rich moments in the Bount arc, drawing subtle inspiration from Buddhist concepts of impermanence and corrupted enlightenment. You see, the Jokaisho aren't just raw power sources, they're ancient reishi reactors, originally used in experiments that led to the creation of the Bounts themselves. However, after one exploded in a catastrophic incident, Central 46 deemed them too dangerous and sealed them all away. Kariya's decision to merge with this volatile force not only amplifies his strength, but symbolizes his complete rejection of both human and Soul Society restraint. With this development, the narrative narrows its focus. Only 2 Bounts remain: Go Koga, the loyalist weighted down by honor and internal conflict, and Jin Kariya, now a living embodiment of vengeance and unnatural evolution. realization. It is here when Jin Kariya reveals his true intentions to Koga. He was not there to empower the Bounts, but to destroy the Soul Society. If the Bounts go with it, who cares? Now this causes Koga, the loyalist of the group, to disagree with Jin Kariya. And you're not allowed to disagree with Jin Kariya. Immediately, Jin Kariya betrays Koga and knocks him out. Jin Kariya's betrayal of Go Koga and I guess the other Bounts is not really a sudden twist, but a slow burning inevitability that is seeded throughout the Bount Arc's early moments. We're introduced to the Bounts as a persecuted, fractured group defined by internal distrust and fragmented loyalty. Even during the early mansion scenes, Jin rarely treats his followers as equals. Instead, he manipulates their trauma and desperation, speaking in half-truths and wielding charisma like a blade. Koga, who at first appears to be Jin's most loyal second-in-command, is shown to operate with a strict code of personal honor, reinforced by his visible discomfort when Jin casually discards weaker Bounts like Ho and Ban. This foreshadows a key ideological rift. Koga sees the Bounts as people worth preserving. Kariya sees them as a means to an end. Unlike Jin, Koga questions the nature of vengeance. He trains younger Bounts, attempts restraint, and repeatedly hesitates to kill unless provoked. Meanwhile, Jin's manipulations grow bolder, gaslighting Yoshino, exploiting Uryu's compassion, and using Yoshino's literal death as fuel for his ritual to invade the Soul Society. Jin's willingness to sacrifice Yoshino, someone he once claimed to love, should have been a clear warning to Koga, but loyalty runs deep. And Koga, the ever-loyal soldier, remains blind to the full extent of Jin's ambitions until it's too late. By the time the betrayal was complete, after absorbing the Jokai Shell and becoming something no longer fully Bount or man, Jin's true colors emerged in full. He doesn't just abandon Koga, he casts him aside with no emotion, thanking him as if dismissing a tool that had outlived its usefulness. For Koga, this is the shattering of everything he believed the Bount stood for. Jin no longer seeks justice or survival. He seeks the extermination of the Soul Society and all existence itself, a goal completely at odds with the preservationist ideals Koga quietly upheld. This betrayal isn't just personal, it's philosophical. Jin doesn't merely turn on Koga, he turns on the very idea of the Bounts as a people, exposing his rebellion as not a fight for their future. He becomes not a savior, but their final executioner. In this moment, the final two battles come to light. Yes, there are other moments in between this point and that point, but I really want to just dive into the meat of this arc. This first battle truly puts chills on my back, and that's Go Koga versus Toshiro Hitsugaya. Koga is trying to find Kariya to stop him from his destructive behavior. Though branded a traitor, he no longer fights for the Bount cause, but to end the madness he once helped unleash. As he makes his way through the sewer system beneath the Soul Society, he engages multiple squads of Shinigami, but crucially, he refuses to kill any of them, choosing instead to knock them all out with precision and restraint. His intent is not war, it's penance. Captain Hitsugaya, noticing this unusual mercy, realizes Koga is isolating himself on purpose, and decides to confront him alone. When they finally meet, Koga is already fraying, his body buckling under the reishi he's forcibly absorbed. A final desperate gamble to gain strength to face Kariya. He doesn't explain his intentions to Hitsugaya. He doesn't ask for understanding. He simply fights, hoping that by pushing through one last battle, he can end the nightmare that Kariya has become. The battle is fierce but short. Hitsugaya, believing Koga remains a threat, shows no hesitation. Dulk, his iron elemental, is shattered, and Koga reshapes her remnants into a massive axe for a final hopeless clash. As the two collide under a dark sky and frozen pillars, the signature sad Bleach score plays. A soft piano and strings swell behind the clash of ice and steel. Koga knows his body can't take much more. He's literally burning himself up from the inside to achieve some level of redemption. But but he doesn't stop. He can't. Not when Kariya is still out there bringing the world closer to ruin. Hitsugai, unaware of Koga's true mission, delivers a single clean slash that ends it all. As Koga collapses, the sad music gets louder as he murmurs more to himself than to anyone else. That even if he had reached Kariya, it might have not changed a single thing. It's a quiet, devastating moment. A man dying not as a villain, but as a broken comrade. Unrecognized, unmourned, except for Hitsugai's final act, ordering his squad to find Koga's body so he can be given a proper burial. Koga unfortunately was idealistic. He had wished for a future without war. He had placed his hope and loyalty in the wrong person. He should have never trusted Kariya. We do find out that Koga survives later on, which in my opinion undermines the emotional weight that this scene carries. The second battle I want to mention was the battle between Jin Kariya and Ichigo Kurosaki as we finally enter the end of the Bount Arc. As the final day of the Bount Arc begins, first light breaks over the Serite. We get one of the most quietly devastating moments in the entire arc, where Kariya stands alone, composed and still, when Rantau emerges, firing a Kido shot straight into his chest. This blast rips open his coat and exposes the mark that she feared he had contained, the Bount Crest. This is proof that Jin Kariya is Eugene Courier, a boy that a long time ago she saved during the massacre of the Bounts. The boy she gave a charm to, hoping he could be something more. She gave him power, she gave him trust, and now he's using that same gift to burn down the world. Rantau begs him to believe that things have changed, that the modern Gotai 13 doesn't even remember what was done to his people. But Kariya doesn't care. He's not here for justice, he's here to make the pain permanent. He raises his hand, ready to kill her, but then he stops. A memory. The boy he used to be, cornered by a hollow, terrified, awakened. And when he turned to his tribe for help, they rejected him, for they feared his own power. They feared him. That betrayal was deeper than anything the Soul Society had ever done. Uryu crashes in, using his Quincy bow. Eyes locked, he's fresh off the battle with Yoshi, and something's changed. He says Yoshino knew. She knew Kariya's hatred didn't stop with the Soul Society. It extended to the Bounts too. This wasn't vengeance anymore. This was an extermination. The two fight with everything that they've got. Uryu pushes him, hits him, actually wounds him, but Kariya just regenerates instantly using reishi-like fuel. The tide turns fast as Uryu's rhythm slips and he's about to go down until Rantau steps in again, channeling the Jokai-sho energy through her own body using a second amulet. Buys Uryu time. He has a clean shot to kill Kariya, but he hesitates. He doesn't take it because right then, saving Rantau meant more than revenge, more than pride. Uryu uses the last of his strength to stabilize her collapsing energy. He walks away not as a Quincy, not as a fighter, but as someone who chose mercy. And with that, the last thread of diplomacy burns out. Uryu didn't choose revenge like Kariya. He chose to protect. Anyway, it's Ichigo's turn now, and from the first second, Ichigo's not holding back. Kariya meets him head on, wielding wind and lightning like the end of the world. And as they're fighting, the Soul Society is running around crazy, as they've discovered dozens of unstable Jokai-shos ready to blow. Every captain, every squad is deployed, and as the stakes weren't already cosmic, Ichinose returns, Zanpakuto drawn on Kariya's neck. He turns on Kariya, tells him the truth and how Zaraki reminded him what purpose feels like. But Kariya doesn't blink. He kills him. And when Ichigo demands to know why Kariya killed somebody who was so loyal to him, a comrade to him, Kariya drops the coldest line in the entire arc. I never had comrades, only pieces. And finally, we reach the end of the arc. Ichigo can barely stand, but he realizes instantly Kariya can no longer regenerate. That wound that Rantau gave him earlier cut him off from his reishi. He's immortal now. Desperate, Kariya tries to blow up one of the Jokai-shos, and right before it detonates, Byakuya appears. Silent, precise, he wipes it off the board like it was never a threat. Now it's just Ichigo and Kariya. Kariya has no more tricks, no more backup. They clash one final time, Ryatsu versus Ruin, and when it's done, Kariya falls. But he doesn't scream, he's not angry that he lost. In fact, he says one line, "I wanted to see where you would go." And Ichigo, exhausted, says in return, "You let me win." This was never about survival. It was about making sure he wasn't the last one behind. Jin Kariya is a villain built on the bones of betrayal. He isn't evil for the sake of being evil, nor is he a misguided, idealistic fighting for justice. He's something far rarer in shonen storytelling. A man whose vengeance is rooted in legitimacy, but whose solution is so extreme, so absolute that it becomes impossible to support. Born as Eugene Courier, a Bount child saved by Rantau during the Soul Society's experiments with artificial souls, Kariya grows up with a power he never asked for, and a past no one around him wants to remember. His entire resistance is a scar left behind by the Gotai 13, by his tribe, and even by the very creator who gave him his strength. And instead of healing, he decides to make sure everyone else feels it too. What makes Kariya compelling isn't just his power, it's his clarity of purpose. From the moment we meet him, he's composed, articulate, and terrifyingly in control. He doesn't throw tantrums, he doesn't monologue for the sake of drama. Every word, every action serves the long game. He recruits the other Bounts not out of friendship but utility. He offers them purpose, knowing full well most of them will die in pursuit of it. And when they do, he doesn't flinch, because to Kariya, people are pawns, pieces to be moved. Sacrificed, discarded, he admits this openly, even proudly near the end of the arc. The tragedy though? They believed in him. Yoshino loved him, Koga followed him, Ichinose died trying to change him, and he let all of them burn. When Yoshino dies, Kariya doesn't mourn, he redirects. When Koga questions his path, Kariya disables him and leaves him alive, not out of mercy but because Koga's loyalty is spent. Ichinose, who arguably worships him, is murdered the moment his ideology wavers. And it's not personal, it's systemic. To Kariya, the mission is the only truth that matters. Allies, weapons, Jokaisho, they're all means to an end. And if any of them threaten to shift the equation, he cuts them out like the tumor they are. He doesn't rage at betrayal, he expects it. Philosophically, Kariya represents extremist self-determination. He sees forgiveness as weakness, mercy as betrayal, and hope as a trap. His worldview is that of someone who tried to build bridges and watched them collapse under cowardice and politics. He tried to unite the Bounts peacefully. They rejected him. He tried to believe in the system. It turned on him. So he chooses annihilation, not as a default, but as a final intentional rejection of the entire cycle. When he absorbs the Jokaisho, it's not just a power-up, it's symbolic. He's becoming the very thing Soul Society feared, a living retribution engine, forged from the energy they tried to bury centuries ago. He doesn't want to survive, he wants to leave a wound that never closes. What makes Kariya's downfall though so impactful is the tiny moments of vulnerability we see beneath the surface. His hesitation with Rantau, the flicker of regret when he speaks to Ichigo, his dying line, "I wanted to see where you would go." These aren't words of a tyrant, they're the dying breath of a man who once had hope, who once wanted more, and somewhere along the way, the world convinced him that nothing good could last. That to preserve anything, you have to destroy everything first. It's not a redemption arc, it's not an excuse, but it's a reminder. Even the most monstrous characters don't start that way, they're made. Even Ichigo in the end recognizes the tragic shape of his enemy. Kariya could have killed him, he had the shot, but he hesitated. Why? Because Ichigo represented what he once believed in, a will to protect, not destroy, and it shook him. In his death, Kariya doesn't beg, doesn't scream, he just says, "I wanted to see where you go." That line reframes everything. Kariya didn't die to prove he was right, he died hoping he was wrong. He let him win. That's the difference between a tyrant and a tragic figure. Kariya wanted to be proven wrong, and when he was, he could finally let go. In the end, Jin Kariya isn't just a filler villain, he's a mirror. He asks a question no one wants to answer. What do you become when justice fails you completely? And the answer, if you're not careful, is Kariya. The second half of the Bount arc is incredible, and underrated too in my opinion. This second half I would give like a 7.5 out of 10. And in addition, I want to say, the Bount arc does a terrific job showing how morally gray the Soul Society is. So the lawyer is wrong. The biggest problem with the Bount arc is not the arc itself. I mean, it's skippable under that circumstance. However, it's the fact that the filler carries over. You do hear about Bounts in the following seasons. For viewers who skip filler, this is a huge issue. For some reason, the story keeps the Bount detectors around. So viewers who don't go through the pain of watching filler are going to be confused. This is an impact on canon material, which isn't okay. They are just there to run the clock. They can't actually do anything because they are filler. They can't have any real impact on the story. They're just there to annoy the viewers. Renji beats this opponent, not them. They're just there until Renji gets there. In addition, it ruins a key moment later on in the story where Ichigo is trying to unlock his full potential as a Vizard. In chapter 221, Ichigo refights a fake version of Kenpachi. He needs a killer instinct. It's the perfect moment of realization for his character arc. Unfortunately, after beating the anime shows Ichigo seeing a version of Jin Karya. No reason why, he just does. And it ruins this top 10 manga moment for me because the pacing and emotions are dried out and it feels lifeless to me watching the anime. I feel like if the filler wasn't placed outside of the Bount arc, it might even be thought of as a much better arc overall. There is a lot of wasted time throughout this arc. From start to finish, what should have been 20 episodes lasted nearly 45. That's honestly the worst part of this arc. The concept of the Bount is cool. The power system is fascinating. Even their culture and history as a viewer, I was invested into and would have loved to learn more. But instead, it re-explains itself over and over, shows pointless fights that don't do anything, and the overall arc feels more bloated than me eating Chinese takeout. The pacing is horrendous. The animation is a complete downgrade. I mean, there are moments where it's not even animated. The characters are overall disappointed. Now, don't get me wrong, there are still some good characters that highlight parts of the story. I mean, I'm talking about Jin's really cool, Yoshino's cool, Gokoga and Makichinose did some interesting things in their final fights, but that's about it. Uryu and Mayuri feel out of place in their character writing, more so Ishida than Mayuri, but still. Despite all that, the music is pretty good though. But that's just Bleach. It just has good OST. That being said, the outro, the first outro of the arc, is the best outro in all of Bleach. I mean, look at this, it's hilarious. In the end, the Bount arc is a paradox, both the most avoidable and most oddly unforgettable part of Bleach's anime history. It's a filler arc that tried to matter, and in doing so, it became something uniquely divisive. While its flaws are undeniable, bloated pacing, inconsistent animation, and character missteps, it also gave us moments of genuine emotional weight. Some interesting villains, Maki Ichinose's journey of failed vengeance, Yoshino's tragedy, Jin's failure, Gokoga's emotional breakdown, and Uryu's brief but heartfelt connection, all speak to an arc that aimed higher than most filler ever dares to. It didn't always hit its mark, and it often got in its own way, but it wasn't lazy. The Bount arc is not a hidden masterpiece, but it's also not a dumpster fire that this fandom made it out to be. If you squint past the repetition and filler tropes and all my other complaints, there's something there. Something weird, something ambitious, and maybe even a little special. It may not deserve a seat at the head of the Bleach table, but it's certainly earned more than a spot in the trash. Call it what you want. Filler, misstep, curiosity, but for better or for worse, the Bount arc tried. And although overall I'd say it's slightly above average, I would say that's more due to its consistency than the overall arc itself. Overall, I place the Bount arc in either high C tier or low B tier. Your Honor, my client, the Bount arc, pleads guilty on the charges of third-degree boredom and not being subscribed to Pokesel. Thank you guys so much for watching, and in the words of Ginichimaru, bye-bye.